Hello there. If you think UK law is broken, then hear the real galactic scale of the mess from an expert speaking at a New Culture Forum Locals event in Southampton, Barrister Steven Barrett. I fervently hope that Ben Habib, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage are watching this.
Thank you very much. You're all very kind. I did a talk to a bunch of people that I began with a line that went down quite well, which is that I'm not supposed to be here. And that was because I'm supposed to be a commercial chancery barrister in Lincoln's Inn. But I'm afraid those years have long faded by, but I can still use that line because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be at Maya Tusi's stag party. And instead, I'm talking to a New Culture Forum. But this is more important, and Maya, bless him, will understand. I'll join him later. Don't worry, he'll be fine. I want to start by asking you to feel sympathy for somebody that I think you probably don't feel any sympathy for. And that's a gentleman called Sir Keir Starmer. And I want you to consider Sir Keir Starmer's life. He didn't do terribly well academically, and he wasn't able to get into Oxford as he wished. And he went to, I think, Leeds. And then by backdoor channels and graduate routes, he did finally get to go to Oxford. He was very good looking. By all accounts, he was the barrister that is part of Bridget Jones' diaries. By all rumours and myths and urban legends, that is what he is. And I'm a bisexual, so I'm more than happy to say that as a young man he was very attractive. I don't have any problems with this. And his life was set. He's named after a darling of the Labour Party. He is the Labour Party's darling. He gets a QC under the new Labour system for how you appoint QCs. He becomes Director of Public Prosecutions under a Labour government. He miraculously manages to secure a safe Labour seat in Holborn and St Pancras. It's not safe anymore, but it was then. And he's told, darling, just do this. Just front the face of the organisation. You can fly in private planes, you can have fun on the international stage, you can feel desperately important and have all sorts of trappings. And by the way, Parliament will give you your own pension, and that's more important than flippancy might suggest. Don't forget that one. That's an idea we'll pull back to later. But this poor darling is told, you will be Prime Minister of the UK, and all you have to do is let the civil service run everything, and you'll be fine. And you know what? We've arranged for the former head of the civil service. She's fantastic. She's going to be your chief of staff. She knows everything about everything. You're going to have such an easy life. You don't need to worry about anything. And in less than a year, the entire thing has crumbled and fallen apart. Feel sympathy for Keir Starmer, for he knows not what he is or what is going on. He doesn't understand why the system is collapsing. He started to make vague noises. Oh, I might ask, I'll try and incentivize the civil service so that they do what I ask them to do. I don't really understand why. I keep pulling on this lever and nothing's happening. I don't really know why. All of his ministers will be in exactly the same position. It's actually made worse by Lord Hermer, who is Keir Starmer's personal appointment, who has raised the bar for when a minister might not be able to do something, when computer will say no to the minister. But that's largely just icing on the complete collapse pie, because the system was broken anyway. You can compare Keir Starmer directly to a man called Rishi Sunak. They're identical. They both just wanted to front up a system that they believed the civil service would run. They just wanted to be the front office guy. They just wanted to be the man in front of the cameras, the guy who goes on the telly, while all the detail is dealt with by the civil service. Well, I'm afraid that the sad and tragic reality is that our civil service is not fit for purpose. That's what they're facing. That's their reality. That's why you should pity Keir Starmer. And the reason that our civil service is not fit for purpose is fundamentally law. Okay? A lot of people understand that if you just print money, you cause inflation and you crash an economy. Good. That's absolutely true. Keep believing that. It's true. Good on you. If you just print more laws, you will also crash an economy. That's because, and it took me years to realise this, because don't let the voice fool you. I'm a working class boy, first in my family to get A-levels. I got into Oxford, and I'm proud of that, and I won't ever be ashamed of it. And I read law. And don't get me wrong, I was in that law library. I'm afraid it was all paper books back in those days. And I was reading stuff, and I was going, oh, this doesn't make any sense. What is this? What am I doing? How does this work? And of course I had to go through that. That's the normal process of learning law. Then I had to practice law, which is different from learning law. So you had to realise the realities of how the system works. But I was dealing with a much slimmer, I was a lot slimmer then too, but a lot slimmer legal system. Our legal system has become unimaginably fat in the 22 years since I sat in that law library, 25 years. Let's forget how many years it's been. But anyway, some years since I sat in that law library trying to get my head around it. I rose, if you want to use those terms, or however you see it, I worked my way up from the county courts, doing tiny matters, low-level stuff, to doing bigger matters, to doing weightier matters, to getting in the High Court, to going to the Court of Appeal. I've lived in the legal system a long time. One of the great honours of my life was I got to explain the Constitution to Parliament. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that the MPs needed to get me in to explain the Constitution to them. I think they should have known it. I didn't say that, I wasn't going to be rude, but you know, it is fundamentally ridiculous that we've got to this point. The law is so fat and flabby that almost nobody knows what it actually is. And you see this bubbling up in human life. You see it with the police officers, okay? Bless our police officers. Now, I'm sure some of them are corrupt. Some of them commit crimes and are wrong uns. But the vast majority of police officers are decent human beings. They always will be. I will never not trust a police officer. If I see them in the street, I will assume they are a decent human being who I can trust. But our officers cannot understand the law. You saw this around the Just Stop Oil protesters. They didn't know what it was. Can I arrest them? Oh, do I have to? What about their human rights? I'm not sure. This doubt is caused by legal fat, by legal flabbiness. That's what's going on. Too many words, too much confusion. The state cannot function. Even if we got rid of Lord Hermer and reversed his ridiculous advice, the civil service still wouldn't function. It would just mildly lower the test of worry. And it's about humanity's relationship to risk. And I think as we all age, we've got to admit that we have a relationship to fear and anxiety. That's what we're doing. That's what being human is. Our relationship to fear has got completely out of whack. And if you're a civil servant, your relationship to fear is just not connected to the real world. You're worried that there might be a tiny risk that what you're doing is illegal, therefore you won't do it at all. Well, every time I walk outside my house, there's a tiny risk I might get hit in the head by a meteor. Therefore, if I'm a civil servant, I don't walk outside my house. This is not rational. The law has grown so fat and flabby that it is now metastasizing. Okay, this is the phase we're now in. We're going to move forward to the point, if you've seen you all know the bad people in our society. You'll see them on the television, on social media, doing their protests and pushing the boundaries. That's what they're doing. There's an awful lot of other bad people who are doing even far worse things that I don't even want to think about because I'm a dad, and I just get too emotional about that. But there's all sorts of people in our society who have never known any real boundaries because they were never given them as children. And the law has not replaced that. Worse, because of this flabbiness, because of this fat, the law has started to break down. The law has denied them barriers. And without clear barriers, even if they wanted to behave well, they can't behave well. And the ones who are bad, we can't necessarily lock up or get rid of, which is what we do need to do in a society. That's a perfectly normal part of human society. And when I say that the law is metastasizing, that's what I mean. And I can take you to any little bit of it, but let's fly metaphorically in our minds to Ofcom. Does everybody know Ofcom? And everybody knows the BBC, which is an utter disappointment to everybody in this room. I would have assumed 20 years ago would adore the BBC and be very proud of it, as I adored it. I grew up in a bookless household without BBC Radio 4. I probably wouldn't be the man I am today. I now cannot listen to BBC Radio 4. The BBC is itself metastasizing. And that's because of something called the 2003 Communication Act. Okay? All you need to know about it, and I don't want law to sound like magic. It must never sound like magic. It should be readable by ordinary people. You have a constitutional right to know what your laws are. That's why ignorance of the law is no defense. The opposite to that is that, officer, I have a constitutional right to know what my laws are. Your laws are nonsense, therefore I am not bound by them. That's a structure and a feature of contract law that we really need to get back. It should be part of our constitution. But the 2003 Communications Act is absolute word garbage. It's thousands of words. It's unbelievably long. When I sat in that law library, I had to, huff and puff over Acts of Parliament. But by goodness me, they were nowhere near as long as this rubbish. And it's just created total fog and total fiction. It then also says, oh, by the way, a secondary body will make even more rules about what the rules are. It doesn't tell you. So the Act of Parliament, the thing that the politicians passed, doesn't actually tell you what the rules are. I spent hours reading it, couldn't work out anything. I only wanted one thing. I wanted the definition of impartiality. I spent 3.5 hours rooting round like a pig looking for a truffle, trying to get this definition of impartiality. It should not take somebody as qualified or as expensive as me 3.5 hours to find a simple definition in an Act of Parliament. That's just rubbish. That's a system that's not working. It then went on to say, Ofcom will define what impartiality is. Oh, right, good. So go and have a look at what Ofcom says impartiality is. Ofcom has completely changed the definition. I don't want to bore you too much, but Ofcom's invented something called due impartiality, which is basically a thing will be impartial unless we say it isn't. This is not law. These are not rules. These are not clear boundaries. You cannot have the front door of your house that is sometimes a door and sometimes it isn't. Because I'll bet you a tenner, when the burglar comes, it won't be a door. We've got to have clear rules and clear boundaries. And when I talk about the metastasization of law, this is what I mean. It's the utter breakdown in its meaning. Ofcom's just been fined 4.6 million for attacking GB News. Now, oh dear, poor Ofcom. Yeah, so sad. We'll pay for that. Yeah. That's our cash. Yeah. We also still pay for Ofcom and all of its hundreds of employees. We're paying for a system that doesn't work, for a system that is bloated, flabby, and simply cannot work. So I just take you back to having pity for that man, because it's not just Ofcom, it's everything. Throughout the last 30 years, every single important area of our lives has had ridiculous amounts of words printed saying that they're law and just creating a complete soup of nonsense. You should pity Keir Starmer because he cannot govern. Whether you believe he could or is able or is a good man, it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter at all. We must fix the system. And that's the last thing I want to talk about, is what I call the Great Restoration. We must have a system that works. We must, let's just take that definition because we've talked about it. We must be able to define impartiality. We can't define it, it doesn't exist. We must be able to define all sorts of boundaries so that we can say, nope, you're a wrong one, off to prison. So that we can say, no, don't do that, do this. So that we can fix our society and have a homogenous system that we all want to live in. We all want to. I always think one of the rudest things, they've been controlling us for years through shame. They've been controlling us by calling us racist. And actually, I think that the only reason that ever worked is because we're the least racist people that there are. Absolutely. Genuine racists are not afraid to be called a racist. They take pride in being a racist. It's who they are. We're not racists, so it worked on us. It's not racist to want to have a good system. We're all multi-ethnos in this country. Everybody's kid should grow up under a safe, simple system. All those police officers I respect are from all sorts of communities. They all deserve a safe, workable system so that they know when they're faced by violence, when they're faced by wrong-uns, they know exactly how to respond. They don't doubt. They don't pause. They don't stop themselves from acting. We all deserve to live. This is where the Free Speech Union comes from. We all deserve to know what we can and cannot say in public. And I'm afraid I'm not a free speech absolutist, so I've got friends who are. But I think that free speech, it's got to be curtailed a little bit, but I want the boundaries of where it's curtailed to be crystal clear. And they will call me an extremist, and they try and paint me as ridiculous, and all I do is stand with the rule of law. And I can tell you what the rule of law is in 11 words. Now, there was a great lefty lawyer, and he was good at law, he was good at contract law. He should have stayed in contract law. But he wrote an entire book on the rule of law. And it's what Lord Hermer's drawing on, and it's where they all channel these ideas from as Bingham. He wrote an entire bloody book on what the rule of law is, and I can do it in 11 words, provided I can remember them correctly on a hot summer's day. Clear rules, known in advance, enforced equally, without fear or favour. 11 words. That's the society we need to build. And when I was a bonny lad, when I was what we call a pupil barrister in the chancery world, in the bookish hallows of Lincoln's Inn, we used to compete, and our pupil masters would make us compete to write as few words as possible. That to us was the art of law. That is the art of law. And instead, we somehow got to the 2003 Communications Act, to all this flab, absolute flab, reams of it. It needs to be cut out of law. And when people talk about the Great Restoration, it's going to have a massive legal element. We're going to have to perform open heart surgery on the legal system, because you can't afford a mistake, and we can't just shut the country down while we fix everything. We can't just put up that, like the BBC used to, down for maintenance. We can't put up the test card. We have to carry on as a country. So we're going to have to perform expert surgery on our law, but the one thing we're going to have to do is cut words. And I hope that makes sense to non-lawyers. I'm sure it must. They took me away. They made me a lawyer. And they do believe that they're sort of somehow superior to ordinary people. And this is nonsense, because obviously we're all equal. So it just never landed with me. But we are going to have to cut all of this nonsense. People are building careers in this fat. They're like living like camping out in these little parts of law. They're making lots of money, but I'm afraid that has to stop. Because what the country needs, what we all need, is a society that works, and that means a legal system we can all understand and use. Every non-lawyer should be able to understand their legal system. It's our legal system. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. That's why we have to pity Keir Starmer, because he can't do any of this. He can't face any of the reality. I think a lot of other lawyers are coming round to it. There was a very lefty academic from Cambridge who said that, do you know what, we have too much laws, and she said it in public. And I was quite proud. I was like, oh, proud of you, admitting that. A lot of lawyers won't, but it is time, because a lot of lawyers are still like that little boy in the law library, worried that the problem is not the law, the problem is him, as I once was. Well, I'm older, I'm uglier, I've lost my cheekbones, a little bit more robust, and it's time to say that the problem is not me. The problem is the law. And I want you all to just take that away, to understand it, never be ashamed to turn around and say, your law doesn't make sense. Okay? Thank you very much. I'll have questions, I think.